In this section, we'll look at farmers during the Industrial Revolution. Besides the workers during the late 19th century, the farmers were also losers in the changing economy. Farmers often felt the need to buy new equipment, and they would have to do so on credit during the planting season, hoping to pay off the loan later during harvest season. Often, however, the crops weren't as good as expected, and when this happened, the farmers found themselves going deeper into debt, with interest adding on each year. Now, the Industrial Revolution just made matters worse. New inventions such as the tractor or steel plow cost more money up front during planting season, and thus the farmers went deeper into debt, hoping that the new machines purchased would mean more crops and more profit. Unfortunately, the farmers produced so much they even outstripped the growing demand, and thus prices for farm produce dropped. New competition from new exporters such as Canada or Russia or Australia, among other things, didn't help. In short, overproduction lowered prices, even as farmers were, producing more. Now, most farmers may have been the salt of the earth, but they weren't smart in macroeconomic terms. When they began to get less for the crop, they tried even harder to break even by producing even more. Of course, it made the whole situation worse. In this graph here, with time on the bottom, you can see the profits indicated by the blue color begin to end and the annual deficits indicated by the red color begin to grow. In many respects, this is the essential problem for farmers today. Overproduction leads to deflation. Farmers hoped that banks would help them by easing up on credit, giving loans with lower interest rates. But banks would not do this without government putting more money into the economy and expanding the money supply. And as the Industrial Revolution lecture has already noted, however, the government still had a pro-business, conservative, restricted money supply ideology. Farmers, simply put, were more producers than consumers, and as such wanted more inflation, which in the aggregate would help them. The prices for their products would rise, but again, the government wouldn't comply. Another reason the Industrial Revolution hurt farmers was the railroad monopolies. Farmers in isolated areas where only one railroad line existed couldn't choose different railroads, so a monopoly for the railroad existed. The railroads, unregulated by the laissez-faire dominated government, would charge farmers an exorbitant price just to bring their products to market. Individual farmers had no leverage at all. They were so spread out it was difficult to organize any resistance. On the plain states, it was particularly bad because no rivers existed as an alternative method of transporting goods. The railroads would just say, take it or leave it, and if the farmers didn't take the deal, their produce would probably rot. In this pro-farmer cartoon, a railroad monopoly represented by the snake threatens freedom, Lady Liberty. While in the background you'll see on the left a little but powerful railroad boss has the ear of Uncle Sam, which of course represents the U.S. government. The farmers did, at least, have one champion in Congress, famous for calling for a rural revolt. Tom Watson was an attorney, newspaper editor, and writer from Georgia who served in the House of Representatives and was a leading champion of rural postal delivery. Watson called on poor folk and farmers to unite against the wealthy elites, and in fact, he later ran for president. In any event, despite the obvious problems getting farmers together, rural communities soon began to organize the best they could. In 1867, an employee of the Department of Agriculture, Oliver Kelly, formed a secret order called the Patrons of Husbandry. While initially just a social organization for farmers, it soon began to pressure state legislators to try to do something about the railroad monopolies. The Patrons of Husbandry soon grew into a much larger and more politically active group known as the Grange. The Grange did get some states to regulate their railroads within their individual boundaries, the so-called Granger laws, and did help pass the Interstate Commerce Act, which this lecture had noted earlier. As noted earlier in the Industrial Revolution lecture, however, the Interstate Commerce Commission was largely ineffective without the ability to adequately inspect the railroad company's books and to enforce his decisions. The Grange did help farmers form cooperatives to, buy the industrial products and machinery they needed in bulk, and thus, at a lower price. But it was still difficult to get farmers to cut production, and thus collectively work together to drive prices for the produce back up. Moreover, in a general sense, the pro-business laissez-faire Supreme Court, which again was mentioned earlier, still hindered the agrarian reform movement. Farmers therefore had a lot running against them. This concludes the section on farmers and the Industrial Revolution.